Okay, I think we're back again. Apologies for that technical glitch. I think, can everyone hear me now? All good? Great. Good, good. So welcome to Bridging Careers, Ending Exclusion session. So we're going to be focusing on the importance of surrounding yourselves with people from different cultures and backgrounds. This is the fourth of 10 free events this week with over 40 amazing speakers. I'd like to begin by paying respects to the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. I'm Yvonne Kelly, the founder of Glow Up Careers. We're a tech-enabled global career coaching community and a social enterprise. So this topic is very close to our heart at Glow Up Careers, as we do a lot of refugee and new migrant pro bono coaching. So we're bringing you Bridging Careers in partnership with Cisco, who've made this happen for us. And we've got, thank you, Pam, and the wonderful team at Cisco who jumped in and helped us with that little technology glitch. So this event is free all week, and all of our speakers have volunteered their time, and we're so grateful for them sharing their knowledge in this current environment. So this session will run for 60 minutes. If you'd like to share a comment in social media, we'll be using the hashtag BridgingCareers, so hashtag BridgingCareers. We'll also be live tweeting the event, so please feel free to share. Our Instagram and Twitter are at GlowUpCareers. And just make sure that you tell us what you think. We have coaches on hand to answer questions in the chat. So jump in there and pop in your questions. So we'll get straight into, I know we're running a little bit behind time, so we'll get straight into this session where we'll hear from an amazing panel on their experiences with diversity and inclusion. So we'll start off with introducing the panel. So Ruan Al-Kalmashi is a refugee advocate and speaker. She's undertaking her Bachelor of Law and Arts in International Studies at UTS, and her experience as a former refugee has contributed immensely to her work in policy with Settlement Services International and United Nations. In 2019, Ruan was a finalist in the Young Leader of the Year Awards, and she's also just about to start hosting a culture and politics podcast called Who Speaks. So welcome, Ruan. We're delighted to have you join us. Next, we have Alice Young. So Alice is the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Lead for IKEA Group, Australasia. So after the Boxing Day tsunami, Alice and her husband moved to Sri Lanka to help with the relief effort, and she volunteered for the International Organization for Migration. Unfortunately, Alice got dengue fever, so as she recovered, she decided to study human rights law. She moved into the human rights sector and had some great experience there. And she's recently been elected to the Executive Committee of NEOPA, which is the New South Wales Equal Employment Opportunity Practitioners. So welcome, Alice. Arash Boardbar, welcome Arash. So Arash is actually Glow Up Careers Refugee Ambassador, and Glow Up Careers launched on World Refugee Day, and we were delighted to hear from Arash. He's a Youth Employment Officer for CMRC. He's the Global Coordinator for the UNHCR Global Youth Advisory Council and Chair of the Asia Pacific Refugee Rights Network. And his passion is really proving that refugees have a lot to contribute around the world and have so much talent on offer. So welcome, Arash. I think our conversation today, is going to be amazing and so many insights. So last but definitely not least, we'd love to invite our moderator for this session, Craig Foster. I'm sure all of you have heard of Craig, who's had an amazing career, starting as a professional soccer player, former captain of the Socceroos, then pivoting into broadcasting, where he had a triple Logie career with SBS. He has a real passion for speaking out for minority and marginalised communities. And this week I heard him referred to as a human rights warrior. He's an adjunct professor of sports and social responsibility with Torrens University and an author of Fighting for Hakeem for his huge involvement is spearheading the global campaign to free refugee footballer Hakeem Al-Araiba. Is that right, Craig?
Al-Arabi, yeah, Hakeem Al-Arabi.
Okay. And yeah, so Craig has obviously had such an amazing career, and in our sessions this week, we've been talking about pivoting careers and, you know, how do you transfer your skills into different careers. So Craig, you know, you've obviously got a really deep passion for human rights and for inclusion, and you know, we've called this session Ending Exclusion. Can you tell us about how that real passion for human rights has, I suppose, been present through your whole career and brought you to what you're doing now, advocating so much and doing, yeah, the most amazing work in this space?
Yeah, all right. Okay, great. Thank you, Yvonne. Thanks for the opportunity to be here with everyone. It's a really amazing panel. So I'm looking forward to just giving these incredible people some questions and hearing about their life experience and the wonderful work that they're doing in community as well, and also in policy. From my point of view, and I'm delighted to hear that Alice is a human rights law expert. Because human rights is a concept that is very often, of course I'm a law graduate, is very often seen in too much of a legalistic manner. Actually, what happens is on many of the occasions where we just feel basic compassion for people close to us in our community, nationally or internationally, very often what we're thinking about are human rights, but we just need to make that link. For instance, you know, the rights of disabled peoples, the rights of Indigenous peoples, you know, women and children, you know, the right to housing, the right to, you know, food security. All of these things are just really simple concepts that we talk about really regularly. And then when people usually think about human rights, it's because, you know, someone from Amnesty or Human Rights Watch or the UN is talking about it. Where, you know, I think the conversation can turn, and I hope it does in future. It's one area where sport can play a really important role here, I think, is in normalising the concept of human rights. To say, actually, this is just about all of us being equal. You know, much of it's about racial equality, gender equality, and equality is a really core tenet of the Human Rights International Framework. So I guess that's a good place to start, because, and just, you know, taking a moment to also recognise that traditional owners of the land where I am and everyone else watching at home. We've called this Ending Exclusion. And, you know, for the next 45 minutes or so, let's just imagine that, you know, we can do that. And if we can lead in that respect here in Australia, then what a wonderful legacy to pass on to the next generation. We've got three great people to talk about it. So, guys, I might just go to Arash first, because you're in the centre of my screen here. And, you know, let's just look at, for instance, the concept of multiculturalism. Okay, there's obviously a lot to learn, and we talk about a great deal about surrounding ourselves with people from cold communities, culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. So for each of you, perhaps begin by articulating what you see as some of the benefits of embracing people from different cultures.
Thanks, Craig, for the question and great opening. Thanks also, Yvonne, for your kind introduction. I would also like to take the opportunity to pay my respect to elders past and present in the land that we are all living in. In terms of the question, I think there's a lot, really. I mean, being in Australia for 5 years, I think what I could see is that from the CALD community, we can learn, you know, different skills, different approaches to life, and how we overcome barriers, how we connect, how we have fun. We all have different sets of skills, languages, and cultures that contributes to Australia one way or another. And I think, you know, apart from really that kindness and happiness that, you know, diversity bring into a community, I think the other, you know, important component is that it has really helped Australia's to boost its economy. You know, for businesses to learn into really how to interact with each other outside Australia and also interact with different regions. It has really helped us to bring the creativity out of us and learn from one another. I mean, starting a business that maybe in Australia we wouldn't have in related to some of the cultures. I mean, all of us love kebabs. We tried different things. It's just a lot to offer when we are talking about diversity and inclusion, and it really helps us as a community to be so much stronger and kind.
Thank you, Arash. Rowan, would you like to talk to that?
Sure. Thank you so much, Greg, and for participating in the session. I would also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. I think it's so important as former refugees and immigrants who are literally profiting off this land. You know, we must accept the invitation that's contained in the statement, Uluru Statement, to work together with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander for a better future. And I guess in relation to your kick question, Australia is incredibly multicultural and wonderful, but I think we do have a lot of work to do in regards to Australia's narratives of illegality. We have a regime of detention, deterrence, and denial, particularly when it comes to the refugee and asylum seeker conversation. And I think this problem is ongoing. We've seen countries continue to criminalize the immigrant and refugee body, and a lot of work can be done around that. I think networking with refugee communities is extremely important. And I say that because going beyond just participation, I think engaging and integration in meaningful dialogue will result in that greater understanding of social and cultural literacy is really important. And I think at the end of the session, although all the stories we share will be inherently raw and personal, these experiences all form part of this collective story that reveals issues within, political discourse. So yeah, it's great, but we need to be discussing these issues.
Yeah, I might come back to you on that, particularly as a former refugee, Rowan, around the importance of listening to people, to listening to new arrivals, to listening to refugees, and centering people's experience, as it's often called, and how difficult that is in popular media in the country in Australia, which makes it really challenging. Before we do that, Alice, you've got extraordinary experience. You're with IKEA now. You've been Amnesty International. You've, of course, human rights legally trained. Immense experience also as a volunteer. I read abroad. We talk about this concept of human to human connections, and we see that across Australia in a really profound way. That when people meet Australians or new arrivals from other cultures, we break down those barriers. But how important is it to talk about what Arash mentioned, which are the economic benefits? So it's okay, we come from the heart and we'll say, okay, we're both human beings, but on the other side, to also articulate these issues. Given that you're with IKEA, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Craig, and hi everyone. Really great to be joining you today. And I'd also just like to take a moment to acknowledge traditional owners of the country on which we're meeting today as well. So I do just need to clarify, I'm not a human rights law expert. I have undertaken a certificate in human rights law, but I need a little more practice before I became an expert. But coming to your question, really about those business benefits of incorporating everyone in Australia into our society. This is something that IKEA as a business really recognises. I was reading the Deloitte Access Economics Business Quarterly Report yesterday, and they were already ringing the alarm bells about the fact that due to COVID, we're going to be having a dramatically reduced number of migrants coming to Australia. And that is going to have an impact on our population growth in the short, medium and long term. And I also noticed yesterday that the Department of Home Affairs acknowledged that instead of bringing in circa 18,000 humanitarian entrants in 2019 to 20, I think that's going to be down to 15,000. And somehow in Australia, this narrative has been turned into language of othering, of them or us. But as a migrant nation, as a nation that only survives on the basis of having people coming from overseas, we really need to consider those economic benefits of our new arrivals, and how do we incorporate them into our communities and pave pathways for them to build a new life and to use that resilience, use that creativity, that diversity of thought, that diversity of experience as quickly as possible, so that they can integrate and so that they can contribute to the community. And at IKEA, we very much believe that business has a role to play in enabling this integration.
And what about the concept of creativity then? Because in my own life experience, coming out of football and then SBS, and, so both of those are contexts of diversity. They are contexts of inclusion and the very nature of multiculturalism. So, I've spent virtually, since I was probably 15 years old, in the beautiful game where everyone around the world plays and every one of our teammates is from a different part of the world, and then in SBS, which, has quite possibly, the most diverse workforce in the country. So to me, it's this question of difference equaling creativity and beauty and progress, because ideas are coming in, and you're within this environment of these extraordinary cultural differences. Take Les Murray, who I worked with on air for so many years. Is a Hungarian refugee, and so his worldview and his thought process is very different from mine. And then we have people from many different cultures. How important, how valuable, guys, to each of you. And we might mix it up this time and go to Rowan first. How important is that mixture of diversity for all of us moving together in a progressive way?
I think it's so important. And as you mentioned, with creativity and sport, and for me, it's art. I feel like it's such a universal language. It knows no barriers, it knows no borders, and it just brings people together. And that it has art within itself, has that rich exchange of information, ideas, thoughts, values, and that transcends local and national and international communities. And I think if we can figure a way to cultivate safe spaces where young people, where women, where refugees can develop a voice and a foundation for their rights, I think it's really important and necessary as well.
Yeah, just maybe, echo what Ruan said. This is really, really important for us because, in a time of crisis, we really see what is the value of, the diversity, because then we see how neighbors reach out to each other. How do we, pivot using the skills and expertise that we have in a crisis to really help out each other. One of the interesting things that I have seen, that a lot of the young people at the forefront in COVID from different, cultural background were able to really communicate in finding different solutions, in creating masks, in reaching out to young people to help them, overcome that mental challenge, because we have that diversity. I think it is really, really important that would really help us to move forward if anything else would happen. This year has been crazy, but honestly, without the diversity, I don't know how Australia would be able to nurture all this potential that it has within the region we are living in.
I'll go to you as well, but you might want to also, I guess, comment on the new initiative with IKEA, specifically around refugees.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Craig. Just sort of rounding out what Arash was saying, really in a business context, it's about how do you enable that human connection so that 1 + 1 becomes 4. It's not either or, it's and. And at IKEA, we try and do that through our values. We've got a very strong set of values. We're a humanistic organisation that has as its aspiration creating a better everyday life for the many. And this is where programs like this refugee program that we've just embarked on in Australia, though it's actually been running in Europe for a little while now, comes from, because as a values-led organisation, we've been contributing to UNHCR through the IKEA Foundation for a number of years now, and that's not necessarily widely known. A claim to fame for me is an IKEA flat pack for refugee camps, which I just thought was an absolute stroke of genius. But we've been giving financial donations, we've been giving in-kind donations, because refugees is one of our 3 core focus areas through the foundation. But really, where this comes from is a firm belief that everyone is talent. And we know that refugees have untapped skills and experience. And if we can provide a bridge from where they find themselves to where they want to be, then coming back to my earlier point about business having a role to play around integration, then we can really add that. So having sort of been supporting UNHCR and the dialogue around refugees for a number of years, our global CEO made a commitment last year to support with €100 million sort of donation, I guess you'd say, to support skills for employment programs in 30 countries around the world, across 200 stores. And this is called Stand for Refugees Initiative. And it looks like it's a sort of work placement skills for employment program, which it is. And so at that sort of grassroots level here in Australia, we'll be supporting 180 people through the program over the next 3 years. But actually what we're hoping to do is have these sort of conversations, is to change the narrative, to lend our voice, our shoulder to changing the narrative around refugees and refugee integration. So we're going to do that in 3 ways. We've got the work placement skills for employment. We're also supporting refugee women in the camps in Jordan to design and make products, which we are then selling globally. And then finally, community activities through working with UNHCR and other refugee support organisations.
Oh, that's wonderful, because this concept of what we're seeing in sport, and also in a new breed of business activists, I tend to think, people who are in leadership positions in companies both here and around the world, whether it comes to climate or refugees or any other issues, people are now saying rightly, and particularly, Rowan, the next generation, the young generation, are saying we no longer are prepared to separate our personality and our humanity from our employment. They must be one and the same, so we have to conduct ourselves in a particular manner. And if we want to speak up on these issues, we think that we should be able to. How important, Rowan, is the next generation, for instance, educating the young people and, new arrivals, but this next generation having a voice in particular in popular media?
I think it's so important. Just actually, what you just said reminded me of a TikTok that I saw this morning. And TikTok has been huge, in COVID-19 situation, everyone's self-isolating, but TikTok has been a huge force of social activism that young people are utilizing. And I think one of the things, the TikTok that I saw this morning in particular, it was saying that, healthy dialogue is so important. Yes, I can disagree with you on what your favorite color is or your favorite ice cream and things like that, but I feel like human rights, refugee rights, asylum seeker rights, LGBTQI rights, disability rights, these things, basic necessities, like not so much arguing with, I feel like. But yeah, it's been really interesting to see the way the young generation have been utilizing these social media affordances to push, to provide themselves with a voice and a foundation for, what they're passionate about.
Well, I've never been on TikTok, but thank you for that. I might have to go and start an account now. Arash, you're with the Asia Pacific Refugee Rights Network. And during the Hakeem campaign, your organisation was really front and centre doing fabulous work with some, Evan Jones and some really good friends of mine who I worked closely with on that campaign when I was in Bangkok. Coming from that perspective then, talking about refugees, one thing that does happen in Australia, and I'm worried that it's happening is that, we see big numbers of people being displaced around the world, and we expect that to increase, with climate migration, for example. And so the narrative here, to Alice's point, has started to become, we need to beef up all of our defence. We need to spend much more on borders and things because there's more people, displaced, but they're people in need. So from this, from your point of view of the region, how important is that Australia engages in, with our regional partners here?
Yeah, thanks. We really were lucky to have you, working with us with Hakeem and supporting this to happen. I think in the region, one thing we need to realize is that becoming a refugee can happen to anyone and in any country. It's not something that, you could be climate, refugees, you could be anything, tomorrow. We had fires in Australia, and that could lead, possibly into a massive displacement. So we really have to react in a way that, if it happens to us, then we are ready, we feel that, someone else would welcome us. And we do have the massive, I think the biggest displacement in the world in Asia Pacific now. And I'm a little bit worried because you can see that there is a culture using COVID. It's becoming a culture to close borders as an excuse that, safety, and then now as an excuse of, the economical challenge that we have. But for us, we have to be a little bit smarter because it is quite important for us to, be a leader in the region that we are. We are really proud of, being championing diversity, women leadership, and also refugee resettlement. But I think slowly you can see that it's been shifted, and learning bad practices from other countries where the border closure becomes permanent, and using that as an example, not to really be welcoming others who are in need. And this would be really, really damaging. And in a sense that a lot of the times we have to also work, with other countries that are neighboring countries like in Southeast Asia to be able to find a solution collectively. It's not a responsibility on one countries, but I think we as Australia are quite responsible in sharing that humanity with others. And we have seen the massive, contribution. We've been recently running a campaign called For You campaign, where, it basically showcases a lot of the refugees' contribution at the forefront in during the COVID. And the interesting thing is that now it has been noticed, not because they're doing it only at the COVID situation or at the pandemic. They have been doing it for so long, but also because there was a lack of other stakeholders because of the restrictions, lack of other international organization. So refugees were really able to be at the forefront and contribute, and that catches a lot of eyes and say, oh wow, so these group of people might be different to the people that we really see. But no, it's day-to-day refugees that now are our neighbors. There are doctors, engineers, and mechanics, and the people that we interact with. So if we create this whole notion of, from moving forward we really need to change our policy, it would impact especially for the next generation as well.
Yes, the former New South Wales Australian of the Year, of course, 2020 was the former refugee from Iraq, robotic surgeon, and doing incredibly well. We might talk about, or I might just touch on the opposite case in a moment. But how important is it then, Alice and Rowan, to tell these positive stories? What Arash was rightly saying is, most many Australians have never experienced being a refugee. That we have many people like myself have never experienced having to flee somewhere. And perhaps during the bushfires was actually one of the first times that people had to get in a boat, and all of a sudden they got no homes. And many people in the refugee community were saying, well, maybe people can become more empathetic here. But it takes both, doesn't it? It takes all types of discussions, and one of the really important ones is to tell the stories of the wonderful strengths and skills that refugees have brought and are bringing to the country. Alice?
Yes, and hopefully you can hear me a little bit better now. I got some chat that apparently my headphone was causing an issue, so hopefully it's better now. I think that's a beautiful sort of reflection around slash story for us in Australia to really be thinking about, because to your point, that is the closest many of us will be to experiencing a refugee style fleeing, even if it's only for a very short period of time, and potentially we still have somewhere to go back to. And I think that's something that's been, and I'm speaking on personal behalf, not IKEA's behalf right now, that has been lacking from the public narrative in Australia around refugees, is that common sense of humanity. This could happen to me, it could happen to people that I know. You know, aren't I lucky to have been born in Australia versus somewhere where there's been civil war for 20 or 30 years and people have no choice but to leave. So I think the dialogue has been hijacked slightly and ended up in a space of choice versus non-choice. And coming back into, with my IKEA hat on again now, this is where businesses, I do believe, and IKEA believes, have a role to play in demonstrating a positive narrative at a really human level that connects at a business level as well. Yes, we started this conversation about IKEA's values, and that's why we've launched this program. But we're not just doing it because of values. We're doing it because it makes absolute commercial sense for us to do so. We believe that this is talent pool that we're not tapping into, and indeed a lot of other corporations in Australia are not tapping into. This is a customer base that may or may not know who IKEA is. So, you know, this is commercial for us as well as being values-based. And I think the more organisations that have positive stories to tell, the more chance we have for changing the narrative and reducing the focus around other and increasing the focus around community and togetherness, which is one of these values I keep talking to.
Can I just follow up with you briefly, please, Alice, on this concept of, you know, on changing the narrative and other things. One of the issues to refugees is also that it's important for people to understand that we can all believe in equality. Our framework, in other words, that's so important, is because we expect Amnesty and Human Rights Watch and, you know, Settlement Services International, who Rwanda does some brilliant work. We expect when those people talk, it's going to be around compassion and empathy, and that they're going to be arguing the case of refugees. But it's also important for us to recognise, and I often say, just because I'm fighting for the basic human rights of refugees doesn't mean that I have any political affiliation. People need to be very careful to say, well, just because you're speaking up for human beings, you can't be placed there or you can't be placed here. It should actually be right in the middle. It should be immutable like that. And so when business speaks up on these concepts, I think it's really important because it speaks to a sector of society without being able to really, I think, easily and quite often falsely characterising them from coming from a certain sector.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It brings it back to centre, which is actually where, and again, IKEA hat off, I feel that fundamentally Australians with their sense of fair go, actually the majority of Australians sit in the centre. But somehow or other, the narrative has ended up playing up at the margins, at the outer extremes. And so by demonstrating through action that these 180 people will benefit just as much to our community within IKEA and our customers that come to IKEA, then we think that that will be a powerful story for those who may be viewing this as a story that sits at either end of the spectrum. Let's bring it back into the middle.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. Rowan, what are some of the barriers that refugees face then? Let's just pull this back in. We have a range of people watching us who might be new arrivals, they might be refugees, migrants from different backgrounds, and they might be finding it difficult. In fact, SBS research last year, well, two forms. One that's a $1 billion benefits to the country of and social cohesion, everyone working together, and creativity was a core of that. Research that try to be implementing diversity. What are the first you and Arad, and we'll go to Alice finally on this. From the corporate side then, what are you seeing the barriers?
Thank you, Craig. I think just going back to Arish's point of, how he used COVID-19 as a metaphor to describe what, refugees or newly arrived immigrants experience, and particularly drawing similarities between COVID isolating and the self-isolation that one feels as a refugee in the first few years of arrival and settlement. I think recognition of overseas qualifications is a huge barrier to refugees, or rather former refugees finding employment that is within their skill set. Social marginalization, employment uncertainties, these are two very common experiences that refugees experience. In Arabic, we say خوف من المجهول, which literally translates to fear of the unknown or fear of a sense of uncertainty about the future. And I think without a doubt, this pandemic has affected everyone globally, but I think this virus has affected vulnerable communities significantly, refugees and asylum seekers at the most fundamental level, which is their ability to seek protection in another country. So how do we move, towards that global recognition of refugee qualifications? My mom was a teacher overseas in Iraq, and my dad was an alchemist. He made gold, and obviously facing persecution as coming from a Gnostic ethnic minority in Iraq, and that displacement, it's obviously affected us significantly. Currently in Australia, we don't have one agency or organisation that's responsible for assessing all overseas qualifications in Australia. And I certainly don't think that this one-size-fits-all approach is sufficient for employment purposes. But I think we've seen the work that Arash has done with the multicultural organizations and Alice with IKEA. And I think these opportunities do exist, but we must be made more aware of those opportunities, and perhaps companies giving some financial incentives. Paid internships is a huge one. I find that some organizations can be quite surface leveled and superfluous with their initiatives, in the sense that they'll employ skilled immigrants, but it won't be paid internships, just merely to tick their quotas. Cross-cultural training is really important as well. Short-term bridging programs, perhaps creating those local support networks, and I think more funding for existing programs would be really important as well.
Sure. Maybe I'll just touch base on one thing that, kind of fits perfectly on the screen that we are right now, is the role that different stakeholders play. It's usually when you hear, you were saying, Craig, that, Amnesty International, you're expecting those typical and traditional organization or entity or institution to take part. But I think, for example, Yvonne started, this interest and trying to a lot of people having a totally different background, and she could have not done it. Same thing for IKEA. And I think, like, for example, Cisco having us, on the call and supporting us. Every individual institution have a role to play. And we just don't realize it until we really get the conversation going, and something would come up always. So it's really, really important to encourage any institution, to just get involved And maybe like now, I think also in universities have a massive role to play. For now that everything is virtual, I think it is time for them to show they can really contribute by getting some of the displaced community into their online platforms. In terms of what could we do, and some of the challenges, I think for a lot of the refugees, and for myself as well, when I first came to the country, the perception that we have of refugees is sometimes not really helpful in terms of we're trying to help, but the first thing that I received here when I wanted to go to university was that it's too early, or when I wanted to apply for a professional job, that it's too early, you're very new in the country, and that crushes a lot of people. So I think it's really important to push and know that the people that are refugee or resettled in Australia or came here as asylum seekers been through so much that we can't even imagine. So they have the capacity, they have the aspiration like anyone else, and the skills. So it's just that we need to give them the tap on the shoulder and the first opportunity, because being new in a country, apart from all the responsibilities that you have for your family and siblings, also as a young person, you want to grow and thrive, and you just need that first push, that first opportunity to take a step in. So it's for different organizations to really just try. And sometimes I feel when we speak to businesses, they think getting the refugees, it's a whole new people, we need to have different structures in place. No, it's just same people with possibly similar backgrounds in the expertise. We just need to open the doors and let them try, and just to trust. I think whether you're in a HR position or reading the CVs, we should be aware of our unconscious bias, and how do we judge people, what do we think that they know and they don't know, rather to just really give them that opportunity and see how much they have to offer. So that would be one, I think one of the things I wanted to talk about, that the push that we should get at the beginning, it's a challenge, and also that first opportunity. And I think the best thing, Rowan mentioned as well, is that networking. We really need to be able to connect them, to other people, and through networking, we find a lot of opportunities that overcomes the barrier that we have.
Okay, thank you, Arash and Rowan. I just want to make a point as I'm going to Alice. I'm going to ask you, Alice, to speak to business owners and people in the corporate world, because IKEA is clearly a leader in this space. It's a huge investment that you've made, and it's brilliant. When you talk about the narrative, let me just point out two things. Number one is, we talk about multiculturalism, and I always say, as I come out of football, so I can use the term, is that I'm an Australian WOG. And what that means is I'm Anglo-Celtic background, come out of a wonderful area of Lismore, northern New South Wales, and I spent the preponderance of my life in the world game, within this crucible of the world coming together to play, and I'm better off for that. So, this is not just about compassion for refugees and extending a hand and from this kind of victim mentality. This is saying that diversity and friendships and community of people from all around the planet in this wonderful place we call Australia is improved us. It has improved us as a country. It has improved us as people. And we're in a better place today. The other point I might just make is that because in the refugee area and asylum seekers, Australia's been really challenged for a long time now. And we're going, there's been periods throughout our history, in particular the last 20 years, and especially the last 10. And so what happens is that in order to advocate for them, we have to go to try and open the hearts of Australians. Okay? Whereas we could just as easily be saying, these are brilliant people. It's our loss. It's your loss. You had Behruz Bashani, who was over in Manus Island, is one of the most incredible a poet and writer and award-winning, a journalist who now, sadly, we've lost to New Zealand. And we've got Moz Azimi and we've got Farhad Bandesh, these incredible musicians and poets and artists. You're talking about quite brilliant people. So that's also a really important message to give to people. So Alice, from the corporate perspective now, talk to corporate Australia around, you know, what are the barriers, what you faced as barriers internally as a professional that you might be able to say, look, this is how we've solved those issues.
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's so much here that I'd like to deep dive into. There really is, because you know, we're talking about individual barriers, not being able to get your qualifications recognised. And to your point, Craig, brilliant people, but not just in Australia, but in most OECD nations. There's a bit of a supply and demand piece around people. We've got too many people with one skill set, not enough people with another skill set. And so we've constructed these sort of barriers to entry, which means that people can't, you know, sort of move across all these talent pools. And that's a far larger conversation and not the question you asked me. But in relation to, you know, sort of businesses, the argument for doing this is going to be different for each business. In a values-based business like ours, there was a fair amount of heart as well as head in this decision. And as I say, we didn't come to this lightly, and it wasn't a new thing that we suddenly turned on a tap and said, oh, let's start skills for employment programs. And Ryan, just to sort of make you feel comfortable, our work placements are 2-month paid work placements, and people are doing real jobs. They're actual IKEA jobs. And also, Arash, to your point, you know, we haven't dumbed those jobs down. They're not intern or jobs light. They are our actual jobs. We have taken the participants on our program, and I should hasten to add, we're just at pilot stage now. So we're the first 11, and I'm hoping it all works really, really well, because we've got another, 169 to go through in the next 3 years. But we have taken those participants through a 3-day pre-training. And the reason for doing that was we actually worked with a partner called Community Corporate, which is a social enterprise based out of Adelaide that specialises in supporting marginalised people to get into employment. All sorts of marginalised people, including refugees and asylum seekers. And they are experts in this space, and they recommended to us that actually the #1 barrier for access for most refugees was going to be confidence. That, to your point, Arash, this sort of constant knocking on doors when you're new in a country, the lack of network, the lack of understanding of how does it work here? I know how it works somewhere else, but how does it work here? Over time breaks people's confidence down. And so this 3-day training program was ostensibly to tell people about IKEA, how we work, what they could expect when they got to IKEA, but actually it was just about normalising Western notions of the world of work and making that familiar enough that people would be able to engage with it, come to an interview, and doing interviews via Zoom or WebEx, you know, and you can still feel the fear when people are sitting on the other side, you know, no matter the fact that you've tried to normalise it and you're trying to, you know, sort of really take it down a notch. You can tell that people, A, really want it, and B, are trying their hardest. So, you know, head and heart has been involved for us. We've been lucky to tap into a network, which I would highly recommend to any organisation that is looking to engage with refugees and asylum seekers. And it's a group called Humans Like Us, which has been set up by an amazing woman called Selena Chu. And what she does is she basically promotes businesses to hire refugees and to make it easy. That's where I met Yvonne. That's where I've met other organisations who are doing great work in this space, ANZ, John Holland. There's actually an awful lot of organisations in Australia that are supporting refugees in different ways with employment programs. It just so happens that we've kicked off a program recently. So I think it's got to be relevant for a particular business. But the simple tenet of we're short on talent, we need more talent, and this is an additional talent pool, would be one that speaks not just to most HR directors, but also to most CEOs.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alice. Sounds like a distinguished list of companies, talking John Holland and others. That's good. I'm going to be in touch with all those CEOs because we need them also speaking out on, the basic rights of these people as well, and so that's outstanding. I'm just going to leave, before we go to Yvonne, I know that she's going to jump in soon. I just wanted to I'll go to Arash first and then finally to Rowan. Both of you have kind of 30 seconds to a minute each, just on, what does it mean for Australia moving forward from here post-COVID to be a truly inclusive society?
Okay, I'll be very quick. I just want us to imagine this, that, especially in Sydney, I think, and, Victoria, we had that period where we were told that we have to isolate and stay at home. And, for the first 10 days, people were like freaked out, really angry and conscious. And we were told that we don't know if it's going to be extended or not. Going through that experience, think what people on offshore processes in detention center are going through, not knowing when they're going to be released. We will not have a full inclusive society until we really include the people who we put there intentionally. So I'll just leave it there.
All right.
Just on that point, I think going back to the center, that human element is so important. We have so many people that are invisible in services, in policies, and I think enough with the divisive politics that involves zero commitment to social change. And I think it hampers our collective efforts. And going forward, we should really embrace multiculturalism and diversity. And that's the key to ending exclusion.
Sorry, everyone, we've lost Yvonne's audio for just a minute. We'll just try and get it back and she can do our wrap up.
Can people hear me now? Yes. Oh, good. Thankfully. Sorry, I don't know what's going on with my audio today. We heard from Cisco's VP of People yesterday who said that her first interview for Cisco and WebEx, she had some issues on her side as well. So I'm glad it happens to everyone. So yeah, I just wanted to say a big thank you to all of you. I learned so much from that conversation. And Craig, I just have a final question for you. I know obviously, I'm sure most people have heard about the work that you did with Hakeem and the book written. I just wanted to ask you, why do you think, obviously that was one story that got a lot of coverage and you helped that to come to the forefront. Do you think that interest, I suppose, in that campaign has helped to take this conversation further? And what are your thoughts on what we can do to make sure that we're all doing something to embrace and include?
Yeah, great. So let me start with the back end of that question first. So I think it's really important. And there's what we were talking to Alice a little bit about before. So what you see a lot is this politicisation of certain sectors of society, and refugees is one. But if we all agree that we are equal as human beings, we have very different views, we have very different religions, we have very different backgrounds, but we surely must be equal as human beings. There must be a basic treatment that is acceptable for all of us. Certainly there's a basic level to which of ourselves, and that's with Hakeem, because Hakeem was, being mistreated by two externalists, by Thailand and Bahrain, and so some really easy villains. He was being tortured. He was in prison. So he also sport. And so therefore could be characterised, if you like, as what you could see as a good refugee. Okay, you know, he's living here, he's playing sport, he's one of us, so to speak. The important element is to take that understanding and say to Australians that actually he's different from everyone else who's offshore. He's exactly the same. And this concept of we talk about the basic rights of human beings, and that's where we're falling down, and that's where I've had the discussion and continuing to do so with Australia as well. That's why I talk about, that's what I believe that business and sectors of society have out on that. And we might say when it comes to asylum seekers, refugees, that this is multi-partisan over a very long period of time. But the point is this: I don't accept that businesses' role is to provide employment, to make money, and not to speak up on social issues where people's basic human rights are being breached by our own country, no less. Sport is the same. It's not good enough for me for sport to say, well, I shook the hand of a Syrian, Iraqi, Sudanese, Iranian, Kurd. I shook their hand, I played against them, and we said, let's respect each other and go. And then when these people are coming here, we say, oh, yeah, but you guys are the bad ones. That's not acceptable. And it's not acceptable for sport to have Awer Mabil, a Sudanese refugee, playing for the country and use him on the posters to say what a wonderful job we're doing in multiculturalism. And at the same time, we have all other South Sudanese refugees offshore demonised for almost 8 years now. That dissonance has to stop, in my view. We're shared space where we can all come together and agree, business, sport, and every sector of society. It's just around basic human rights. So I just talk about the minimum standard of treatment of all people to which we ascribe as Australians. It doesn't matter whether you're a CEO, a broadcaster or Socceroo, or a CEO or chair of a major sport in Australia. We all have to have basic standards that we, as Australians, are prepared to accept in our name. And that's why I think we all need to be speaking up on this issue now.
So well said. And the whole reason for our Glow Up Careers business is based on the fact Arash and I met at the start of us launching the business, and we realised that there are a lot of Australians out there who want to help, and often they don't know how to help. So we now have 100 coaches that all, as part of their training, have worked with refugees and supported them in career coaching. And that's how I met Tony, and how Cisco has got involved in this whole event and to bring that to life. And Tony had some great success with coaching a refugee who was driving an Uber and managed to have a conversation with an executive he was dropping to the airport, and he's landed a job in IT as a result of that. And that was just that confidence that you spoke about earlier, is just giving people a boost that they can talk up, and that there's a lot of Australians that are happy to support them and help them with networking. And Arash and I do a lot of work together to make sure that Australian businesses and coaches are reaching out and embracing and bringing those people into the community and making them feel part of it. And I've just had the most awesome experience and learned so much as well with all of the former refugees and new migrants that we work with. And we're really looking to expand the work that we do in that area. And this whole event, we wanted to make it very inclusive and make sure we highlight that diversity as well. And tomorrow afternoon, we have a session on resilience. We have a former refugee called Yasser Nasseri, whose boat sank on his way to Australia, and Yasser will be sharing his story. On Friday, we have Aminata Conte Biguer, who is from Sierra Leone and unfortunately was captured by rebel forces when she was 18 and has just launched, she's just published her book that I read last weekend. And just phenomenal stories of resilience and overcoming, things that we just could never even think were possible. And yesterday we had Hawanatu Bangura, who's a filmmaker, who was talking to us about mental health. So we've really tried to highlight through this event those really important issues, and we hope that everyone can join us as we go. I know we've run a little bit out of time, but we're just making up for that little technical glitch at the start. So thank you to you, Craig, for moderating such a deep discussion and touching on so many important topics for all Australians. Alice, really appreciate the work that you and IKEA are doing in hiring refugees, and hopefully through Selena and humans like us, we can, as Craig said, get some more big corporates on board with that. Ruan, love the TikTok. I think a few of us will have to jump on there. And Arash, we so love working with you and CMRC and all the wonderful work you're doing with helping new migrants and refugees find employment, and Arash, you taking that to a real global level and putting Australia in the map in that conversation. So Arash and I have been working on Arash's career together as well, and just seeing him flourish over the last few years. It's just the possibilities are endless for new migrants and refugees, and I feel myself, as I said, you don't have to come from the Middle East or Africa to be a new migrant. There's so many Irish and English and people from Western world that are also integrating, and for some reason we seem to be embraced more. So I totally agree that we need to be treated as equal, and there shouldn't be any difference between that. So thank you so much. We really look forward to continuing these discussions. All the live tweets are out there. I'm sure there's lots of really gold and really good information that we can use to push that message out further. So we will be back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. and we're going to be talking about networking. So our practical career search tips are in the mornings. Afternoon, we've got Lane Beachley, Stacey Copas, and we have a wonderful panel that's covering resilience. And as I said, Yasser will be on that panel too. So just to subscribe to the YouTube channel you're on now, 10 a.m., 2 p.m. Those videos will be there. We'll keep them there on an ongoing basis, so you can share them. We can get this message out widely, and even if every one of you that watch this, just speak up and talk to other businesses about the benefit of hiring new migrants and refugees, we can make a movement and make some great changes. So thank you everyone, and we'll see you later in the week. And one last thing is I'm just going to share this QR code. If you open your camera, that's a way that you can connect with myself and our team of coaches at Glow Up Careers if you've got any questions.